Hello, everyone. My name is Destiny Parker-Stewart, and I'm going to be doing my older adult presentation on my grandmother. She is 83 years old. I will be referencing to her as my interviewee during this presentation. Erickson's biopsychosocial theory of development. I decided to focus on stage 8, integrity versus despair, because I felt it was most applicable to my interviewee. So, this is a stage of reflection. So, if there are experiences and opportunities that you felt that you did really well on, and that you've made a lot of good choices, and you're overall happy with the decisions that you made in your life, then you will have peace, and this will lead to integrity at the late adulthood stage of development per Erickson. If you have had experiences that you felt you've had some lost, missed opportunities, that you would have done things differently, and that you just look back on and have a lot of regret regarding those decisions, then this will lead you to having some negative feelings regarding this outlook on your life and being in your current stage of later adulthood, and so you'll have some despair. So this is what I decided to focus on in the area because it's something that came up a lot during my interview with my interviewee about the struggles of transitioning into the later stage of late adulthood that she's experiencing right now. So, as we transition into challenges from the Erickson's theory of stage 8, there were 3 key factors that came up during my interview that I felt that I should discuss. So, the 3 things were intimate relationships, parenting, and financial mismanagement. Excuse me. When we look at intimate relationships in regards to my interviewee, she expressed some regret regarding lack of quality time that she spent with her husband who passed away 18 years ago. So some statements that she made during my interview is that, she was torn between being a parent to her 4 grandchildren that they had adopted together. She felt that it was an opportunity to make up for some of the poor decisions she made as far as parenting her biological children, and that she had a second chance and she really wanted to do it right. So she invested so much time into them that she did not spend a lot of quality time with her husband. And so when he passed away suddenly from natural causes, she had a lot of regret and emotions regarding that time that she no longer had with him. Then we had some struggles with parenting. She had issues with parenting her biological children as well as struggling with parenting 2 of her grandchildren. And so we talked about those struggles and how the abuse and neglect that her biological children experienced led to the strained relationships that they had currently. And so we talked a little bit about that during the interview. And then financial mismanagement. So her inability to manage her finances led her to having no retirement plan and limited resources to care for herself at this current stage, which was creating a lot of frustration for her. So, the psychosocial crisis that I decided to look at for my interviewee was her husband's death, because this is something that presented itself throughout our interview, and it seemed to be a common thread that connected everything. And so, some of the 3 key factors I decided to look on regarding his death was my interviewee's inability to process the regrets and emotions that she had associated with his death, the inability for her to manage the finances and pay the bills because he was the primary person who took care of that responsibility, and then parenting and disciplining teenage grandchildren she found to be difficult because he was a primary disciplinarian when they were together and married and parenting the grandchildren. So when she took on this role, she struggled with it. So this created a crisis in her life. So when we look at the biological and psychological and the social levels of interventions that could have been applied during this crisis, and some missed areas that could have been enhanced to help her overcome this crisis in her life. We'll start with the biological level. So just from a physical standpoint, my interviewee is not in the best of health. And so she has a lot of physical limitations that she felt could have been taken care of earlier on in life if she would have had the preventative care, the routine preventative care that she needed in order to maintain a healthy lifestyle. And so, because those needs were unmet, now she's looking at them coming back and having a negative effect on where she's at physically. And so, this creates a lot of frustration for her. So the next level is psychological. So she did not reach out and have any mental health or outpatient services or counseling services when she was dealing with her crisis. This is not something that she felt she needed, nor was something that was presented to her as an option when she was going through a crisis. And so that's something I thought could have been helpful to her during that time. The social level of interventions and interactions. My interviewee expressed feeling isolated, alone, not being able to share or have familial supports because of the strained relationships that she had with her biological children. She could not lean on them for additional help, and then it created some level of isolation for her. When she reached out to community resources, based on her community, they did not have anything that she felt was adequate intervention for her or her grandchildren. So, influence of diversity and differences. My interviewee is an African American. She historically, this diverse population or this culture does not see the impactfulness of how counseling can provide a great tool or be a great resource for interventions when going through crises. So no one in her inner circle or around her who was like her engaged in therapy or had counseling and saw it as being effective to even provide it to her as an option. So it's not something that she explored. Looking at her age, she was a grandparent who was raising grandchildren. Having family members or kinship who is able to provide care and step in when birth parents are unable to do so is a great attribute and something that I think is very important in order to maintain those familial connections and help children with identity, self-identity. But it also creates some strains in relationships, especially when grandparents already have established grandparenting relationships with their grandchildren, and now they have to switch roles and now be a primary caregiver and the parent. There can be some resistance and conflict when those transitions are happening, and if you don't have professional intervention to help maneuver that, it can be difficult for everyone to transition and do so in a healthy way. Education. My interviewee had a low education background. Her parents were not educated, did not graduate from high school. She dropped out at the age of 15 after giving birth to her first child. And ultimately, in her mid-30s, she did go back to get her GED and get a license to do hair. So that's something that she's very proud of. But based on her lower education, that affected her economic status. And so because she earned less, she social and economically was in a lower bracket, and so this affected her psychosocial and physical health factors in a negative way. And so we look at how lower social economical backgrounds are less likely to have effective health care, have access to health care, have the health care needs met, and have positive social interactions within their communities. And so this was something that affected her in a negative way or had an influence on how she overcame the crisis that she was experiencing. One key thing that came up during my interview was religion. And so my interview talked a lot about the importance of God in her life, how prayer has been helpful, um, and how the connections with her church family and her church memberships have been impactful to her. I think a lot of times this is something that is seen in the African American community. She was raised in the South, so that's has strong ties to why she feels that prayer and church and God is important to her. And so a lot of the interventions that we would see as far as counseling or other services that we would have put in place for this family, I think would have been beneficial. She leaned more heavily on the religious aspect in her life. So influences that we look at on the micro, macro, and meso level. If we look at the micro level, we talked a little bit already previously about the strained family connections. And so she didn't have a whole lot of familial support when she was going through a crisis and raising her grandchildren. And so this led her to feel isolated and struggle with parenting two teenagers. At the micro level, she was living in a lower social economic urban community that had higher levels of crime, violence, inadequate resources, poor education system for children, and so she struggled to keep her grandchildren from making poor choices. In addition to that, she also struggled with locating community resources that she felt were effective enough to meet her family's needs. At the meso level, she was getting some of her needs met through an adoption subsidy that was put in place for her to help kinship caregivers, as well as Pennsylvania state funded medical system. And so these two resources on the meso level were important to helping her care for her grandchildren. So that was one less stress that she had to deal with when her husband passed away and she was experiencing that crisis. The next theory I decided to add and look at was the activity theory. I thought it was a theory that applied to my interviewee. The activity theory is a theory that says older adults who are transitioning to later adulthood want to maintain their active lifestyles, and they only don't do so if there are factors beyond their control that limit their ability. And so this is a theory that says, adults want to maintain their volunteer work and the things that they enjoy doing and being active and contributing to their communities. But the only reasons they stop doing these things is when they have some physical limitations, they have resources that are taken away. For example, let's say they no longer can drive, their license is taken, and so they can't get to different places. They don't have someone who could pick them up and do that. So that limits their ability to be active. They may be in pain, and so they don't want to move around and be mobile, or they may be a fall risk, so they're not able to go out into the community, or they may not financially be able to afford to do things going out that they did previously when they're on a fixed income. And so I felt that this was something that was applicable to my interviewee because this is something that she is struggling with currently. Some of the limitations from a theorist perspective in regards to Erickson is that his stages of development want to put people based on their age in those different stages. And we really need to look at the person as a whole, what experiences they've had within their families and their communities, and what cultures they come from, and what's considered norms for them, and what their values system is when we're looking at putting them in different developmental stages. And if they skip or transition through other stages quicker than other people typically their age. And so we can't lump everyone into one group just based on a numeric number. And so that is a limitation to the Erickson theory. As far as the activity theory is, some adults, as they get older, they want to disengage in being as active as they previously were. And they do this by choice. And we don't want to look at them as being less than, or put stigmas on them, or feel or diagnose them with being depressed or having issues because they aren't actively engaging in activities that they were previously. And so we want to make sure that we don't put everyone in one box saying that you have to engage in these activities until you're unable to do so. And so some people stop doing that as a choice. So that is a limitation to the activity theory. My references are included on this slide. A lot of my material was obtained from the Rogers reading, and the interview was great, and I really enjoyed doing this assignment. I learned a lot. Thank you.